Okay, in light of these design standards, how many properties are likely to build out taller than 5 stories? I've seen some commentary in the public forum that we're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 story buildings all throughout the entire gateway area. That's just unrealistic for a couple of reasons. First, I want to address some market factors that are driving those trends, and then I also want to look at how the standards that we adopt into this form-based code can really change how many sites would be subject to the 5 stories so that we have a sense for how making good decisions about certain areas in the future will help to ameliorate those concerns. Okay, so in terms of the market forces, I want to reflect back on a couple of maps that are in the draft plan right now. To the right, you see the districts. There's the Barrel District in yellow, the Gateway Hub in blue, Corridor in orange, and the neighborhood in brown, showing you both the maximum stories and the maximum height that developments can build out to currently based on the draft plan. On the left, you have the sites that are identified as opportunity sites within the Gateway Area Plan. These are sites that have a lot of potential for future development and are largely viewed as the areas that are going to provide the majority of future development over the next 20 to 50 years in this plan. I looked at these opportunity sites and broke them into sites that are vacant and ready to develop as soon as this plan is adopted. These 3 sites could probably develop, immediately. There are some sites that have a few constraints. They're going to take a little bit longer, but within the first, say, 3 to 5 years, they'll probably be ready for development as well. A couple sites there. And then there are some sites that have, more constraints, but there's high potential there, and the property owners are interested and engaged in wanting to develop these sites out. So from a market standpoint, these sites are the ones that are the most ready to go. There are economic factors that inhibit someone making the decision for tearing down an existing building and building a new one, even if that new one could produce marginally higher rates of return. Within those sites, we have 36 acres. So of the 183 acres or so, there's 36 acres that run between 1,400 and 1,800 units with that amount of development potential. So the proposition I'm making here is that most of the sites, if you wanted to know how many sites are going to develop out with those taller stature buildings, most of the sites are going to be late to market. If you have a site that's already got development on it, they're not likely to redevelop as quickly as these sites are. There are only so much units that are going to be absorbed in any given year. And once those units are on the market, there's a disincentive for others to develop their site. So there are some market forces that drive which of these sites develop out to larger stature buildings. The vast majority of the area under this analysis is going to remain just as it is today in current uses as they are today. Let's switch gears a little bit and look at how the form-based code can be used to address this question. We're looking again at the Samoa and K Street corridor. So this greenish color is in the corridor district, and this pinkish color is in the Gateway neighborhood. We're looking at some models that were developed for the AmeriGas site, the Bud's Mini Storage, and the former St. Benny's here. And then you can see, again, in white, the existing buildings in this area, along with the parcel lines around those properties. So before we answer the question, how many of these properties are likely to develop out at 5 stories or greater, I want to look at some of the principles that we talked about with form-based code for shading, because we would apply those in these areas to ensure that adjacent neighbors don't get unduly shaded by this new development. So taking a look at that, if you imagine that this outer box is the parcel boundaries, this blue box here is the parcel boundaries. Before you start a development that's going to be 5 stories tall, you're going to want some pretty significant setbacks. So let's put a 20-foot setback on the ground level. Before you start building, you have to have at least 20 feet setback. We've talked about upper floor setbacks. I think it's appropriate to evaluate 20 feet as an upper floor setback. So you might be able to build 3 floors, this blue box here that's inside the lighter blue box. Might be able to build 3 floors with the 20-foot setback. And then to build to the 4th and 5th floor, you'd have to have another 20-foot setback. So greater than 3 floors, 20 and 20 or 40 feet back. The minimum building distance is 30 feet we're using here. Certainly, unique designs could be created that have, 20 foot or maybe 10 foot wide building footprints, but we're going to anticipate under this scenario that 30 feet is sort of the minimum width that you would want for a habitable space. And then we're going to put some setbacks on the backside too, 10 and 10. So you can see this is in the north-south axis because the sun is in the south and our shading is cast to the north. So we're going to have a bigger setback on the north and a smaller setback on the south. Using these parameters, we basically end up with a 90-foot minimum north-south axis. If you have less than 90 feet, you're compromising either the setback or this minimum building footprint. So using that to evaluate the parcels that were in that image that I showed you previously, we can tell which of these parcels meet that 90-foot setback, or that 90-foot axis requirement, excuse me. Evaluating these parcels here, they don't have 90 feet minimum, so they can't be developed with 5-story buildings under this scenario. Just not going to happen with that standard set. These sites here, it's an open question. It depends on what we do with the east-west axis setbacks, and so we'll come back to that. But these properties here, yeah, you can build those with larger stature buildings because there's plenty of room to accommodate the setbacks that we would give both on the north-south axis as well as on the east-west axis. So let's come back to these questionable properties. We want to know, well, are these going to get developed or not? And the answer is, it depends on how aggressive the decisions are made about how much development we want in these given areas. And we can tune this in for certain areas if we want to have more development, and if certain areas we want to have less development, we can fine tune those with that form-based code. Let me explain what I mean here. If we have building setbacks like we have in the downtown, with 0 lot line setbacks between adjacent buildings, between adjacent properties, as you see here, with no separation between buildings, the property line goes right between buildings that are smashed right up against one another. In that kind of scenario, then yeah, these sites would be completely developable. You could have north-south access setbacks that ameliorate impacts to the neighbors to the north, and you could have wall-to-wall adjacent developments on the east-west axis, and you'd be able to develop all of those properties. So that's a choice. 0 lot line setback is a choice, which would increase the development potential and allow for larger stature buildings on these sites. What if we wanted to have some separation? We're going to allow for 0 lot line setback on one side. So in this diagram, on the low end, you have 0 lot line, but we want to ensure that there's some clear space, some breathing room between buildings on the other side. So each building is allowed to be offset with a 0 lot line setback on one side and a slightly larger setback on the other. What would happen to these properties then? Well, the answer is maybe. It depends on how wide you want that separation distance and how wide these parcels are. So some of them might be able to be developed and some of them probably wouldn't under this scenario. And then sort of the third option would be to have a greater setback. So in this situation, you have setbacks from each building type on both sides of the property, and maybe you want to have large setbacks and ensure that those large setbacks are used for other purposes. In this case, the answer is no. None of these properties would be developable. What you're seeing in the photo above here is a setback that's being used for outdoor seating and dining. What you might see that used for in this neighborhood setting is more for yard space. And so, those are the kinds of decisions that can be made in the form-based code that would go from one end of the spectrum, creating a lot more development potential and allowing for larger buildings, even including those setbacks on the north-south axis, to a lower development potential where these sites would be able to potentially develop to 3 to 4 stories, even though the district allows them to develop to 5. Those particular site conditions would only allow them to develop to 3 or 4.